Hello and welcome to our second day of our Gwent Whole Schools approach to emotional wellbeing training. Today we'll be introducing the spiral of inquiry. You'll be pleased to know that this session is a little bit shorter than day one, and we have tried to make it a bit more practical for you.
The attendees of the live version of this training were able to collaborate in breakout rooms together to apply their learning to a vignette. And the feedback from these activities are included in this training.
So my name's James Cording. I'm a senior educational psychologist with the Gwent Whole School approach team.
My name's Laura Mariner. I'm an assistant psychologist with the Whole Schools team.
You'll be hearing from our colleagues throughout this training day today. So we'll be joined later by Dr. Charlotte Montgomery, who's a clinical psychologist, Dr. Gemma Burns, who's a consultant clinical psychologist, and Dr. Ian Smiley, who's another senior educational psychologist working with the team.
And so today we'll be introducing our spiral of inquiry, but hopefully if you're here, you'll already have watched the training on our components of wellbeing.
So this is the recorded version of our Spirals of Inquiry training, which was originally delivered via Microsoft Teams. We thought it would be really helpful to show you the structure of that day, so it will give you an idea of the kind of timings involved and the sequence of the videos which you will be viewing on this channel. So we'll talk you through now what that actually looked like.
So on the live version of this training day, we started off with a welcome. We took a look at a little introduction to the spiral of inquiry, and then we spent some time looking at a lovely case example from Headlands School. Then we continued to have a look through the spiral of inquiry, but in a little bit more detail at each of the 6 sections of it. And then we ended the day by having a bit of a think about how to implement spirals within your school, and looking at the whole school approach video. So we encourage you, and we would recommend that you follow the same order as you look at this through on your computer. So we wanted to start the day by thinking about the importance of curiosity in our schools. So we recognise that we're encouraging you to embark on a really rigorous process with the spiral of inquiry, and while we're excited to share with you lots of information and detail today, we want to start by remembering that curiosity is the key.
So if we start by having a genuine interest in our school community, in asking those important questions and really listening to the answers, we are starting on the right foot. To give our schools the best chance of success within the process, we simply need to have an open mind and ask that important question, what is going on for our school community? And make sure we follow it up with continued openness and curiosity. So by now, many of you will be familiar with our 5 components of wellbeing, which we covered in our Elements of Wellbeing training. If you weren't able to join us for that, or if you haven't viewed those sessions, they are available on another YouTube playlist which we've got available to you. So just to quickly remind ourselves what those are, you can see them here on this lovely circle diagram in front of you. So they are safety, agency, efficacy, love and belonging. So we know that many of you have already been thinking about these and exploring these ideas within your own school community, and this session will offer the framework for exploring these within your schools and using the spiral of inquiry to kind of really think about what they mean and apply them within that spirals framework. So we're just going to briefly run through in a little bit more detail about what each elements of the five components of wellbeing are for you. So hopefully it's a helpful reminder or just an outline for those who couldn't attend. So as you'll know, then our work to date has focused on making connections within our school communities in Gwent and really listening to the thoughts of pupils, professionals, parents and carers about what really makes a difference to their emotional well-being within their school settings. So this work has led to the identification of these five themes, which Laura's going to run through now for you.
So we're going to start just by running over a sense of safety, which is to do with feeling relationally safe, physically safe and emotionally safe in school. Agency is a sense of feeling that people can contribute to their school community and that they have the autonomy to influence their school experiences. A sense of efficacy is of being able to achieve in line with their own hopes and dreams and of being able to achieve as a whole community. Love is about feeling love for your whole community and having the experience of feeling loved by the people around you, and knowing that the other members of your school community truly care about you. And then lastly on this list we've got a sense of belonging, which is about feeling truly and meaningfully connected to their school. But what underpins all of these components is relationships. So the centre of all the components is in relationships, because you can't do any of the others in a meaningful, connected way without having meaningful and connected relationships. So this slide is just looking about why we chose a spiral of inquiry. So we wanted to just start by thinking about this lovely T.S. Eliot quote, "The journey, not the destination, matters." This really speaks to the heart of why we have chosen the spiral of inquiry as our model for creating a whole school approach to emotional well-being. The spiral itself will take you on a journey of exploration and discovery in relation to well-being, and most importantly does this by considering the whole community.
The reason for a whole school approach is so that everyone is held in mind within the community and everyone has their social and emotional well-being prioritised. In order to achieve this, we need to take a broad approach that incorporates the whole school, that ensures that all voices contribute and make a difference, and that this approach is felt by everyone in the community, including those that also benefit from targeted interventions. A spiral of inquiry allows us to explore the school community as a whole. We look at each aspect of the community and ask questions about how the school is experienced by everyone and how that relates to well-being. It gives us the opportunity to put well-being at the very heart of our community and in a way that makes a difference for everyone.
Importantly, the spiral of inquiry is an approach that is well aligned with our core values, as one of its key principles is the central involvement of pupils, their families and the communities throughout the whole process. We've heard the importance of this, of agency, within our listening exercises across schools in Gwent. What we've also heard is the power of agency, the power of the shift from adults alone making decisions towards engaging a whole community of schools in a culture or curiosity and general inquiry into what is going on for members of that community in relation to emotional well-being.
The developers of the model highlight that the process is one of developing collective professional agency within a school. Such inquiry is difficult for individuals within the school community to achieve in isolation. It is the collaborative inquiry process that matters. So we'll just spend a little time now talking you through the spiral so you have a better sense of what we're doing within schools. So this is it. This is what we've all been waiting for. This is our spiral of inquiry for those who haven't seen it before. Don't worry if it's entirely new to you. We will be spending the day unpicking the different stages of the spiral and supporting you and working with you to feel really familiar with it and how these stages flow from one to another.
So the spiral starts with a process of scanning before moving to focusing in, developing a hunch, considering the learning from this before moving to taking action and checking on the effects of this. We're conscious we've not told you what happens within each of these sections at this stage, but this is so we can focus now on the why and move to the how later on.
Thanks, Laura. So I think the beauty of the spiral of inquiry is that it's built on evidence-based concepts that you may already know. So it might be things that you're already familiar with, familiar practices that you already use in your schools. So there are features that distinguish this cycle of inquiry from other forms of action research, and Laura will explain these to you now.
So it is vital that it is a collaborative and creative approach that involves the whole school community. It starts with a deep understanding of aspects of well-being and the experiences of community members in relation to those. It is specifically designed to influence the experience of well-being for everybody.
The spiral respects the judgment, experience and language of everyone in your school community. Working together on a spiral of inquiry in relation to well-being in your school community creates the conditions where curiosity is encouraged, developed and sustained, and it's essential to opening up thinking, changing practices and creating innovative and ultimately fulfilling approaches to emotional well-being through school communities.
So there are two ways we can use a spiral of inquiry. The first is responding to moments of challenge or rupture, and the second one is to use it more broadly. So if we're using a spiral to respond to a moment of challenge or well-being rupture, we might explore what is going on for members of your community in relation to this incident. And then the other way, if we're using it more broadly, we'll be using a spiral to explore well-being in broad terms within the community, to cast the net and to learn about how well-being is experienced within your community across the components that we view as being central to creating a whole school approach to emotional well-being.
So it might be that the broad use of a spiral of inquiry around the components of well-being is particularly useful in the context of COVID and a year that has been so unusual for members of our school communities. We see the real value of the spiral of inquiry as a model as being in its flexibility, to be used both specifically or discretely as well as broadly. If using the spiral of inquiry in relation to the impact of COVID on the emotional well-being of your community, then we'll be making consultation slots available from the Gwent Whole School Approach team to explore these in partnership with you.
So whatever instigates the spiral, all inquiries need to hold in mind three overarching questions. So these are: what's going on for our school community in relation to well-being, how do we know, and why does it matter? So when we're looking at what's going on for our school community in relation to well-being, this first question continually prompts us to check that knowledge about the well-being experiences of school community members is driving the inquiry process. This question is about inclusivity. It ensures that all voices and experiences are captured within a spiral of inquiry. By asking this question of the whole community, we are ensuring that the information gathered is representative and meaningful.
And the second question, how do we know, helps us to ground the inquiry process in evidence. So everyone, as you know in your school, will have an opinion about what is going on within the school community. And we need to make sure that we have rich sources of evidence to back up our opinions. We know that within school communities, academic outcome measures are used to drive understanding about a school's performance. While valuable, this data has the potential to miss the well-being needs of our school community and its influence on academic outcomes, attendance measurements and staff turnover. When we look at what's going on for members of our school community in relation to well-being and explore this from a curious and open position, we have the potential to gain a richer picture of the needs of our community.
And then the third question, why does it matter, ensures that we are connecting with the importance of the issues being raised by our school community. It enhances our understanding of what's being raised, and it guides us to a reflective position within our explorations. It helps us to consider the impact or the effect of an issue on different members of the community.
And for us as a team, this quote by Timperley really spoke to us. Innovation floats on a sea of inquiry and curiosity is a driver for change. It links these three questions to the spiral and steers us towards having a curious and open mindset.
So we know at the moment this might feel very much like a theory and quite abstract, so we wanted to illustrate it with a real life example from a school. We were really fortunate to speak to Matt Burns, who is the head teacher of Headland School in Penarth. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the school, it's a special school that caters for children and young people with emotional and behavioural needs. So Matt and his team are really experienced in using the spiral to explore a number of needs within their school community. So here we've got a 30-minute video of our conversation with Matt, which I'm sure you'll all agree really brings the spiral to life through his enthusiasm, and you can really feel his commitment as well to his school. So sit back and enjoy.
Okay, Laura and I are here with Matt Burns, head teacher at Headlands School in Penarth. And Matt, thanks for joining us today. You'd said that you We've spoken previously, and you've talked about an example of how you've used the spirals of inquiry approach at your school, and you've come to join us today to talk a little bit about that. I wonder if we could start by I'm curious about how come you chose the spirals of inquiry approach for your school in the first place?
Yeah, good question. Well, I was introduced to it by a colleague, another head, Dave Jenkins, who was running a session for the South Central Consortia, who does brilliant work actually on spirals and the connection with inquiry-based change methods really in school and the new curriculum. Obviously, as a nation, we're heading into a lot of change around learning, and we're really interested in this transformational agenda that we have going on in our country, which is very similar actually to lots of other places in the world are kind of ahead of us in this respect. So actually, the spiral is a model which was developed in British Columbia, among other inquiry models. Actually, it's not the only one, but it was deemed to be a very useful tool, and so it's been closely aligned with the curriculum reform in Wales in terms of really helping schools and teachers think differently, adopt more divergent thinking in terms of the things we do in schools which don't work and how we might go about finding those out. So it to me when I sat in that room surrounded by other head teachers who were also wrestling with those ideas, it was a gift, really, I have to say.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And I know when we met last time and we spoke about your use of the spirals in your school at Headlands, you shared an example of something that your school had done, so a spiral of inquiry process. I think it was around lunchtimes or something.
Sure.
Would you be able to talk us through that?
Sure. And since we've spoken, we're currently in multiple processes of other spirals too, which might be interesting to talk about. But I mean, primarily for us in my setting, and I know probably from the work that you're doing, really interested in people's emotional and social well-being and how that has an impact on learning and our sense of what we do in school every day. So and I think principally, before we start, I think that is one of the primary concerns of the spiral, is it really sets out learning as a social endeavour where emotions are integral to the process. So actually what the spiral does is really connects those things together, and of course those things are well established through the OECD research on the nature of learning, and so they're not kind of, and they're well researched, and we know it as teachers, don't we, that if kids are not don't feel well and not feeling sort of acknowledged and things in the classroom, then outcomes from a learning, typically academic learning process, are not as good as they should be. But so I think so in my setting, that's even more, it's important in every setting, but our kids, they're in my school because they've been excluded, or they've had traumatic experiences in their lives, and so actually very disconnected from the learning process.
Okay.
And so in our setting, that context is really important. So it's the kind of place that we start with everything, really, is what are the social environments, what are the kids' emotional ability to be able to cope with what they're doing, and what are we doing as adults to support or hinder that process. And the example you talk about, which we talked about, which I look back on with great fondness, actually, because I was at a student council meeting, and actually the agenda was about something completely different, but two of the kids were nattering away about the poor quality of food that they were experiencing at the time. And I think my colleague initially was demonstrated great skill, actually, by who we co-chair this meeting with, by showing great curiosity in their conversation and asking them. But it was, and then when they'd asked the question about what's going on with the food, then the conversation really just caught hold with the other kids in the in the group as well. So, and it became really a meeting which was dominated then by the quality of food and the change and the impact that that was having. So, so really it was led from an impromptu discussion, and I guess what we've learned since about spirals, obviously they can be much more organised and planned than that. They can be they can emanate from school improvement agenda issues, priorities. They can be used around just a general check-in with kids. We've been using them around social justice things at the moment, and so asking kids how well we're getting on in terms of social justice. Are we teaching them the things they feel like they need to know or they hear about in the media enough? And that's been fascinating, because as adults you think you're doing enough, and then kids tell you something different. But that initial part of that program really about the spiral is about scanning, and is about showing deep curiosity really in the things kids are saying and the things that are influencing their ability to do well in school or just experience school as a positive place. So that was fascinating. What we did then was we set up a small team, and we really decided to see whether we could find out more about, you know, what these particular kids were saying about the lunches. And so the scanning process part of the spiral, which I'm sure you'll talk a lot about in your session, is really the key part of the spiral for us. I mean, our experience going forward, we're not experts at the spiral, it's worth saying. So, but what we're learning quite rapidly is, unless you spend good time doing that, and actually doing it with a mindset which is unusual for us as teachers, I think, which is certainly for myself. I always think I know. I'm always quick to come to a decision, or, you know, I've been a head teacher for 15, 16 years. I've worked in my field with kids who've been excluded and experienced trauma for 20 years. I think I know a lot. And then until I start going and finding out and speaking to kids, and then I realise I know very little about stuff. But I think it's that humble approach that you adopt, particularly in the first part of that spiral, which is about going with a very open mind, about maintaining curiosity and avoiding really any of the very quick fixes, which as head teachers and senior leaders and teachers we think we always have. Although I'm sure there's some better people in the room than me. So that was a really that was a very liberating experience actually, and we learned a lot in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks actually. So it was a relatively brief period. The scanning process we're doing with the social justice spiral we're working at the moment is much longer. I mean, we've been already doing it for 6 to 8 weeks, and we've been sort of, you know, it's entailed looking at sessions, chatting with groups of kids, looking really kind of deconstructing our curriculum to find out where all the information comes from, and really, you know, doing a lot of awareness with people around social justice issues and thinking about what that even means to people from a pedagogical point of view. So it's much more complex. However, we arrived at some interesting thoughts, and so you know, the point then was to think about those early discussions with the kids, collect all of that information. And by the way, you know, it's much more fun doing this in a team. So a group of us at this point, hammering stuff around, and we were quite quickly able to focus on a couple of issues which the kids were talking about, and then, you know, we were able from that point, and it was interesting actually that how by structuring that process, really been interested in what the kids were telling us, that the level and quality of information was quite striking. You know, there were kids who were telling me that, you know, they found lunchtime really difficult because they couldn't eat with knives and forks, or because they weren't used to sitting around a dining table, always, you know, ate with their hands on the run. They might have told me in that fashion, but it became quite striking actually. There's some of the real social sensitivities around that process, and so it wasn't just about food actually. It was absolutely about the food too, but it was much more about the social context of the experience that they were having, and the high demands really that like a lunch setting places on kids' emotional regulation skills. So
Sure.
that ability to be able to, make choices, make them in a relatively quick place, to be able to suffer disappointment when it's not the right stuff on the menu or it changes, or there was this whole complex stuff which I think as a group of professionals, even experienced ones like ours, are not given the time that we really needed to. So we developed some hunches. We put together some things that we needed to think about in terms of training for the supervising staff, for the people producing the lunches, because ironically what we were trying to do was provide healthy lunches, and they were so healthy the kids hated them. and so and then it was this great conversation we had with the team about, well, is it better for kids to have healthy lunches and not eat, or is it better for kids to us to have a balance and then at least for kids to eat? And so you can imagine the decision we made on that. But and then having a much more longer term strategy, which we actually co-constructed with the kids about how we move to healthier eating and what we can have and what we can't have. And so it opened up some really interesting dialogue and co-constructed ideas, which were brilliant actually in many respects, because we were able then to put in actions which were multi-layered really, and okay. they kind of cut across lots of different things and issues. So there were there's things which impacted on our PSHE curriculum, as well as just the kind of way we structure and organize our environment for lunches. So
it kind of moved outwards then, just from the focus on lunches outwards.
Yeah, it did, because that was the action phase, is when you're really thinking about, you've thought about your hunches about stuff and really allowed those to be on the table, which is well, maybe there's too many kids going up to in the room at the same time. It's staffing issues, it's maybe staff haven't got the skills, it's whatever. And of course, when you put those hunches on the table, allow them the space to air, coupled with the actual, the empirical information you have, actually in our case, we were able to park our hunches up because they weren't very accurate actually. But I think that phase actually allowed us just to think about, to hold those hunches off, because I think if we'd have gone with our hunches straight at the start, we still would have been trying to invent new ideas, the new initiative to sort what has been actually an age-old issue for us in our setting. So I think the spiral of inquiry, in many respects, the art really of democratizing a process, or a democracy-based process of change, okay. Which allows new voices into it. So it isn't that classic, head teachers, whoever you are in your school, and how usually decisions get made. I mean, think of my own, think reflectively of my own practice, and so many decisions, okay, so many decisions have to be made sometimes like that. But actually, when it comes to key things which involve the instructional order, the pedagogical stuff that we do, and the regulatory order, our systems, process, values and beliefs, how many of those those designs are, formed in that inquiry-based way. And I look at my own practice, and yes, some are, but actually the large majority aren't. They're based on, either policies or consultants outside telling you what to do inside.
Yeah.
There are very few of those really, and actually when you think about lots of things we do in school, from a well-being perspective, there's many of those things we do which either within the kind of instructional teaching and learning pedagogy stuff, or even within the values and belief systems up in school, they're either positively enhance well-being or actually inhibit it. And I think that's a weird thing for us to think about as teachers coming into a world that we come into to to want kids to learn and feel great, that actually that there are things that we will do daily that really inhibit well-being unwittingly. And I think for me that's been a massive learning curve, really, when working through an inquiry model.
Yeah, and that's a lovely observation there, that the one about bringing the voices, I guess, of the whole school community in, and also the connection that has with promoting well-being and kind of developing that in the school.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think there are things, of course, within our agendas, because we're so governed, aren't we, by accountability. I don't know a head teacher that's not got their school improvement plan or this etched in their mind the whole time. So constantly when you're thinking about sitting in a room with a bunch of kids telling you that the lunches are not working well, the easiest thing in the world really is to kind of discount that as not being as important as maybe the thing that you've got going on, because you've got a governors meeting at some point you've got to report to, or ESDIN inspections coming up. And let's be honest, we want to be able to perform well in those realms, because that's also part of the health of our school. So I'm not saying we discount one or the other. What I'm saying is that there should be space, and how we think about making space for those incidental as well as the purposeful inquiries. Actually, the social justice example that I gave you, that had come from a conversation between our one of our class teachers and her group, and they were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was a really stressed conversation, because it was this conversation, and our kids can be hugely fixed in their views of the world sometimes, and so they were having this great conversation about things, about what has been the classic sort of, I guess, issue with the Black Lives, every lives type of conversation going on in the classrooms. Wonderful conversation. And then from that conversation, this notion that actually we need to do loads more thinking about how do we form social justice ideas, and how do we do social justice in a more incidental way in our everyday conversations. And just some wonderful examples about. And then there was a conversation about a group of kids reflecting on. We have a number of kids who are born male but actually identify as female in school. Excuse me. And then there was a difficult incident where someone's calling the other one a tranny or something, and then the teachers engaging by saying, no, please don't use that language, that's not okay. And then this whole reflection later on about, well, what's wrong with the word tranny, and how could I have differently supported? Well, how have I inadvertently supported or not supported the social justice in that kind of like intervention? And so it set off a whole new way of thinking, the spiral of inquiry, to think about how we engage ourselves. Because the voices of children and young people and our learners is obviously critical. The voices of teachers is equally critical, but also the voice and information from research, and what are the latest studies and academic work got to show us. And I think that's been fascinating for us, in terms of the spiral really demands actually the you engaging. What has new learning outside of our doors got to show us, and gives us decision about how we makes us decide about how we want to take it on to fit our context. So I think my point is, although I've spent a long time, is it's contextualized, isn't it? No one can come out, what someone else is doing in that school over there probably won't fit your school. And actually the long journey of getting to making some of those decisions is hugely beneficial, I think, to us all, which I think is almost a very different way of thinking about things.
It does seem to be, doesn't it? And can I use the word long journey then? And I wanted to ask you about that, because the spiral of inquiry process demands a kind of taking time. And obviously in schools, there can sometimes be not the time to do those things. I mean, how would you sell that to people? You know, how would you convince people this is useful?
Well, that's a really good question. I think actually it is just our work.
Yeah.
And so if it becomes, yeah, so what I couldn't do is sell it as kind of as a new. I wouldn't want to missell it by selling it as something that's not.
Yeah, completely.
Actually, it'll be, all I can say actually is for those people who are ready for the spiral, they will, I think they will know, because they will have a close affinity, possibly maybe because they have lots of other change methods. They'll also see lots of similarities in terms of lots of the change methods we're used to as head teachers. I mean, head teachers are often and leaders very skilled in terms of change, and it's what we're used to the whole time. And actually, when we're always, great schools always have to be focused on their learners and what their learners think. So actually, it's not a massive, we're not divorcing, we're not moving too far from the position that actually I'd say large majority of schools in anyway. However, what it does is it gives it a much more rigorous focus, actually. So it's a systematic process, which has to be done in a certain order. And I really enjoyed that rigor, because what it did is it slowed me down and helped me avoid some of, like I've already said, some of those, leap into those early simplified options for solving problems. And I think what we learn, don't we, in organisations is when we're quick to buy something off the shelf, or accept the first solution for something. In schools, it's always going to be something complicated. Even my lunch thing was complicated. Then I think it's a mistake often. So I think actually, those schools and head teachers that are kind of read the spiral or listen to you guys and have a connection with it, I think probably what it'll do is it'll just replace some of the processes, the way they thought, or how they operationalized change before. And so actually, for me it's not been more of a time consuming thing. It's actually just a refocusing, really, if that makes sense.
That's so helpful, thank you, because this film will be shown at the beginning of the day, so it kind of really whets people's appetites, hopefully, as they watch.
No pressure, you'll have to edit.
No pressure at all, but just because we've probably got a few minutes left, but I just wondered about a couple of things, really. Coming as a head teacher yourself, what do you see as the kind of opportunities or challenges of using the spiral of inquiry in a school?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think when I first started talking to my team about it, they kind of saw it as, what's this? What are we doing again now?
Yeah.
Not that I introduced an awful lot of new things. I don't. But there definitely is always that sense of, look, it's based on the question you asked me before. I mean, how do you sell something? Actually, it hasn't mattered at all. I mean, I've kind of stopped selling it, really. I haven't needed to. What I've done really is just when there's been an opportunity to do a spiral, like someone's interested in something, we've just used the spiral, and just said, right, let's use the spiral here. Let's find out what's going on. And first thing we do is let's just stay really curious. Let's not jump to any sort of expert conclusions right now. And I've got to say, it's been thoroughly liberating. It's been enjoyable to do that. We're constant. So it's nice not having to have the answers. It's nice to say, well, what's everyone else got to say about this? Fascinating seeing the information that is you're faced with at that point. Some of it's surprising and some of it isn't. But I think there's a real there's something really enjoyable about sticking with the process and not going with the easy or most simple options to start with, that actually really bear fruit in terms of your context. And I think that would be, yeah. So I haven't really had to sell it. I think what we've done is we've done 5 or 6 spirals now, and each one has been very different, and we've made some proper mistakes with some as well, where we have actually jumped to conclusions, and then we've realised halfway through that actually, are we doing that because we said that at the start, and then we had to go back a step. So would be my advice. But yeah, I mean, I would say, and my team have really enjoyed using it because it's just so nicely set out, and yeah, and I've got teachers, our spiral on social justice education, because we've got residential care homes as well, and we're doing it within the houses and within schools, how we educate, use social justice as an educational tool. That's been led by one of our teachers. And when she put a message out to say, look, I'm creating a team, who wants to be in a spiral team? I mean, she had 20 people.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, 20 people. So I was like, oh my gosh, now the team's too big. It'd be impossible getting them all together. So she was able to whittle that down. So she's got a team of 8 people who were they're running that spiral themselves. And I think, well, you can't get more empowering than that, can you? People making real change to the curricula, to the way we interact with kids around sensitive things related to social justice. People want to bring that change about, don't they? So I think, yeah, it's inspiring.
Yeah, and it feels like your staff are obviously, they really value and enjoy that process, to be so keen to be part of them when they come around.
Yeah, and of course, you guys are experts in well-being, and so one of the things that we know, don't we, is creating agency, especially for our children, and also for our staff.
Yeah.
Feel like they have agency, the real power to make decisions and influence. But then you're already on to a great starter, aren't you? So I think in terms of coming back to the well-being perspective, if you're using a tool which is highly curious but also is designed to increase agency, well then you can always lose, because you can do it really poorly, but actually you're on a great start in terms of a tool, in terms of a methodological tool. It's a great start if that's a real interest of yours, like I'm sure it is in the large majority of schools you'll be speaking to.
Matt, do you know what? That's the perfect place, I think, for us to be there, because you've really kind of summarised in such a perfect way. Before we finish, I just want to check in with Laura to see if there's anything that we've missed in our discussions that you want to follow up, Laura.
I think you guys have been incredibly thorough. I think the only thing I thought of as a sort of rounding up is are there any key tips that you might, I mean, I know it's a whole process, it's hard to pin down, but are there any key tips that you might have for a school starting a spiral for the very first time, having done 6 of them?
Great question, and there is. I think first I would not wait for everyone to understand what the process is. I would just get it going. So that's a great question, actually. It's not one of those things that requires everyone to have a lot of training, or a merry band of people who've read the document can just crack on with it. You definitely will make mistakes with it, but actually they're not irretrievable mistakes. So that's the great thing about the spiral. You can always go back and retrace a step. And there was another thing, actually, but I've forgotten what it is. But I think that would just get going with it, I think, would be, because it is in one of those things that needs, and you can learn about it as you go on, and I think it is one of those things, the more you do, the better, the more in tuned with the process you get.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much.
That's so good, Matt. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been really lovely to kind of hear more about spirals. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so interesting. Thank you.
So we thought that was a really helpful film. We think it really captured the kind of the essence of what it's like to be involved in a spiral of inquiry. So we really hope you enjoyed hearing about Matt's experiences with using that with his team. In the live training, we asked our delegates to answer the question you can see in front of you now. So we ask you to pause the video for a moment and think about what 3 words come into your mind now that you've heard an example of the spiral of inquiry. So if you like, pause the video, phone a friend, talk to a colleague, the cat or dog or hamster if you're at home, and just try and come up with those 3 words which spring to mind now.
So when we hosted the live sessions, we used a tool called Mentimeter, which meant that people put their answers to the question in their phones, and it all came out on this lovely word map that we've got here. So you can see the larger words are the ones that came up the most often. So we can see that the words inspiring and curious and listening came up quite a lot for people, which is really encouraging. We're glad to hear that you found it really inspiring.
So there's also a strong theme around inclusivity that we can see here as well. So there's words such as collaboration, co-construction, sharing, and I think the word inclusive is even in there somewhere as well. But I think also what we've got there is people are excited about it, aren't they? That people feel there's lots of really positive words which I can see there. I think liberating, I mean, how nice to see that in there. Exciting and excited comes twice. I think you can see how people feel empowered as well, and there's a real sort of team effort there, isn't there? I think that
we've got like
seeing
democracy and rigorous, open-minded, empowering as well, which definitely is quite encouraging as well. The thought that this way is it's a democratic way of looking at things, and it considers everybody's opinions.
And of course that's going to promote agency as well, isn't it? That people are going to feel involved, they're going to feel heard, and they have some sort of control over what's going on in their school community. So if it's a big whole school change that you're looking at bringing into place, then the chances are that you're going to have those people on board if they feel that they've been listened to. And I think what we're seeing there is how excited people feel and how positive they feel about being involved in that process of change rather than having it done to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we hope that you found that inspiring, and maybe that you came up with some similar words.